What if I told you that one of the longest and most controversial wars in modern history wasn't just about Vietnam, but about ideology, power, and the cost of control? The Vietnam War didn't just change a nation, it scarred a generation, shook the foundations of democracy, and left behind a legacy that still echoes in today's global politics. This is the untold story of the Vietnam War. The roots of the Vietnam War go back long before the first American boots hit the ground. After World War II, Vietnam and then a French colony sought independence. The Viet Minh, led by Ho Chi Minh, fought the French in the First Indochina War. Despite French support from the U.S., the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, 1954, ended in a humiliating defeat for France. The French defeat, in a general defeat in France for many decades before, had provided the Viet Minhs with a concept that French people's disoffended liberal sect with a right to protest, and men like Antoine Latour was convicted by the Vietnamese government for kidnapping Viet Minh diplomats and forcing them to send Frenchmen for U.S. forces to free and seek to establish a free and friendly society for the peaceful transfer of prisoners of war from Vietnam. The Geneva Accords of 1954 split Vietnam along the 17th parallel. North Vietnam, communist, led by Ho Chi Minh. South Vietnam, anti-communist, supported by the United States and other Western allies. The stage was set, not just for civil war, but for global superpowers to collide. In 1955, Ngo Dinh Diem became the leader of South Vietnam. Backed by the US, Diem's regime was corrupt and repressive, alienating many South Vietnamese, especially Buddhists. Meanwhile, the National Liberation Front, Viet Cong, began a guerrilla campaign in the South, supported by the North. The US, fearing the domino theory, that if one nation fell to communism, others would follow, began increasing aid and sending military advisors. The tipping point came in August 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Alleged attacks on U.S. ships by North Vietnamese patrol boats led Congress to pass the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, giving President Lyndon B. Johnson the green light for full-scale war. By 1965, the U.S. had committed combat troops. The strategy? Search and destroy missions, massive bombings, and trying to cut off the Viet Cong supply lines, especially the Ho Chi Minh Trail. But the war was brutal and confusing. Jungle warfare, ambushes, booby traps, an invisible enemy. Despite overwhelming firepower, the U.S. couldn't gain control. Then came the Tet Offensive, January 1968. The most significant soldier mission ever perpetrated by the U.S. by 7,760,000, submissions by bomb, an invisible enemy. By 1968, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched surprise attacks across South Vietnam, even storming the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. Though a military failure for the North, Tet shocked the American public and shattered the illusion of progress. As the war dragged on, the anti-war movement exploded in the U.S. Protests on college campuses, draft card burnings, the infamous Kent State shootings, influential music and media condemning the war. Americans saw the brutality on their television screens, the My Lai massacre, burning villages, and body bags coming home. Public trust in the government collapsed. Johnson did not seek re-election. Richard Nixon became president in 1969, promising peace with honor. Nixon introduced Vietnamization, reducing U.S. troop presence while increasing support for the South Vietnamese Army, ARV. Meanwhile, Nixon expanded the war into Cambodia and Laos, hoping to disrupt the Ho Chi Minh Trail. These actions triggered more protest and condemnation. In 1972, North Vietnam launched the Easter Offensive, which was repelled with U.S. air power. Finally, after years of secret talks, the Paris Peace Accords were signed in January 1973. The US agreed to withdraw. North Vietnam agreed to a ceasefire. But the war was far from over. After US withdrawal, South Vietnam struggled alone. The ARVN, despite US aid, was no match for the North's relentless assault. In April 1975, Saigon fell. Helicopters evacuated embassy staff and desperate South Vietnamese allies from rooftops. The world watched as North Vietnamese tanks rolled into the capital. Vietnam was united, under communist rule. The war was over. Aftermath and legacy. Casualties: over 58,000 Americans and 3 million Vietnamese killed. Psychological trauma. PTSD among veterans, Agent Orange effects and shattered lives. Global impact. Doubt about US military interventionism. Cultural impact. Books, films, and music reflecting disillusionment and grief. The Vietnam War taught the world a brutal lesson. Even the strongest nations can be humbled when ideology overrides empathy and strategy ignores culture. The Vietnam War wasn't just a war. It was a turning point in world history. A war where bullets weren't the only weapon. Public opinion, propaganda, and politics played just as deadly a role. It reminded the world that victory isn't always measured in battles won, but in lives changed. The scars of Vietnam still linger, not only in the jungles of Southeast Asia, but in the soul of America.